Hello everyone, welcome back to the Bucket Think Tank, and today I'm pleased to announce the beginning and the first part of our Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck analysis series. So what this is going to be is we're going to take one chapter from the Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck series, 12 parts, one chapter a month, and we're going to look at it, compare it to other works from the Duck Man himself, Carl Barks, as well as the Ducktales cartoon, the 87 and 2017 version, where necessary. So the reason I want to do this is because Scrooge McDuck is my favorite character, and I feel that he's a very interesting character because of the Life and Time series. We don't get a lot of stories where we understand how characters come to be that feel so definitive. And what I mean is, if you look at characters, let's say Iroh, we don't really get an Iroh origin story to say how we got from his childhood to there. We get enough going on that he was the firstborn, and he did expect to become Fire Lord one day, and one day at the Battle of Ba Sing Se, his son dies, and he leaves, and he pulls back, and that's interesting. But we don't get the full anthology. We don't get the full story, and sometimes it just isn't warranted. And I think because of how Scrooge McDuck is sort of framed, within not just the comics but even the cartoons, he's this rich guy. And the question is how to get so rich. He has businesses in every different field you could think of. So it's not just a matter of, he got lucky in the stock market one day. And this story here sort of takes elements from things Carl Barks, Scrooge's creator, came up with, and sort of used them to create his own almost mythic level life story. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And so here we're going to start with The Last of the Clan McDuck, which is part one, and we're going to discuss three things. So how Scrooge got the number one dime itself, and the Clan McDuck. And these all sort of link into what inspires Scrooge to go to America. So let's start off with the number one dime. We were pretty straightforward in the number one dime before when we talked about Magic of Dispel with the Ducktales villains. So we'll just be really brief about this. The number one dime, as we know, is Scrooge's first dime. It is an American coin that he earned in Scotland. It inspired him to go to America. People debate whether or not it is lucky or not. It varies from medium to medium. In the 87 cartoon, it's pretty understood to be lucky. Even in the Carl Barks versions, there was the idea that it was supposed to be lucky. Magic of Dispel in the 87 cartoon sort of goes the idea that it has some psychic energy because it's been around Scrooge for so long, so it's more like a totem, a symbol of Scrooge's power and wealth. And that by harnessing it on Mount Vesuvius, you can rule the world, or if you go by the comic, you can use it to create the Midas touch. In Don Rosa's work, he views the dime as very much symbolic. It's an inspiration. It in itself is not lucky, but over the course of this series, we'll see how important the dime is to Scrooge, and you could almost argue that it is lucky. So next up is the Clan McDuck, and this will go over all three. So we'll discuss them in order of appearance to how I encounter them, and we'll make the connections as need be. So when it comes to the Clan McDuck, let's talk about Castle McDuck. So Castle McDuck is the ancestral seat of the Clan McDuck. They actually have a seat in the Don Rosa comic and in the Carl Barks version, as far as I can tell. They're both in Dismal Downs in Scotland. It's a fictional place. It's this really harsh, tame, almost swampish land, and only the McDucks were brave and fearsome enough to tame it for their own. And this is as early as 964 AD is when the castle was built. Now, in the 87 version, we haven't gotten the 2017 version, the castle was built by Silas McDuck, who came to the valley, and he's Scrooge's great-great-grandfather, so it's not that old, technically. And he was going to build the castle on just this land. It turned out to be Druid land, and they created the idea of the Hound to chase the McDucks away. Silas had just enough misfortune to build a cottage McDuck, and according to Scrooge and the Curse of Castle McDuck, he was but a lad of 6 when his family left Scotland forever. This is later undone by the episode Once Upon a Dime, where Scrooge is still living in Cottage McDuck into his at least pre-teens. So he has to be at least 10 or 12 when he's still living in Cottage McDuck. Now, in Carl Barks' world, Castle McDuck is no longer there. It's nothing but ruins. By the time Scrooge goes there and Hound of the Whiskervilles to find a pattern of his clans killed. Then we, of course, go to the Don Rosa version. It's still built up pretty much the same way. The difference is between this comic version of Don Rosa and Karl Barks versus the 87 version is the Hound is much taller. In the 87 version, it's a hound, walks on all four legs, and it glows blue. In the comics, it's tall as a man, in this case, an actual adult man, not a duck, and he has this hideous face, and he runs around. He chased them out in 1675. So, a fair decent amount of time for the McDucks. And that's pretty much it for the terms of the Clan McDuck as how far we're going to go here. So let's talk about the introduction of Scrooge and his inspiration. So in the 87 cartoon and in the 27 cartoon, it's sort of different. In the 87 cartoon, Scrooge is young, he's pretty devil may care, he wants to play the bagpipes professionally like his father. His father, Mick Papa, and his mother, Mick Mama, I still don't like that, tell him to go get an actual job, and he has a very interesting viewpoint on what he feels he should have as a job. He goes to a bank and demands to be president, along with all these perks, and he's rightfully kicked out. And he sort of has this mentality that, he deserves to be these things. He wants the best job possible, and he's rightfully kicked out of those jobs. Until he finally ends up in a barbershop. He's, look, I'm not paying you anything. You work for tips. You'll take the coats. You'll shine shoes. You'll clean up. And that's where you get your money from. And he cleans his ditch digger's boots. It takes about half an hour, just clear through all the mud. And in this story, Scrooge talks about how he'd never worked so hard in his life, and he's presented with a dime, an American coin, and he doesn't quite know what to do with it. He's pretty, he doesn't really care. Like, well, I'll just play the bagpipes. His father says, look, you deserve better. You should work smarter, not harder. And he says that you should probably go to America. And once he remembers that he has an Uncle Catfish in this version, he says, okay, well, I'll work smarter, not harder, and I'll go to America. And he gets the ticket in a matter of months when it takes most people years to save up. So that's interesting, and that's pretty much it. He leaves Scotland to go pursue his dreams, with his mother and father proud of him, that he's trying to be better, giving him the bagpipes, just take these and go away, because he really hates those bagpipes. And it's it wants to be a really tender moment. Because, as we'll find out, Scrooge never goes back to Scotland, at least in this cartoon. In the 2017 version, it's pretty straightforward. Scrooge talks to us, a really short little blurb about, I was young boy in Glasgow, and I was working the ditch digger's boots, and he paid me with an American coin, which inspired me to go to America, and it's the most important coin he ever earned. And that's pretty much it. We may get something more in-depth later, but whatever. So, in the life and times of Scrooge McDuck, the actual target of this review, we get something a bit more interesting. It's the eve of Scrooge's 10th birthday, and his father, Fergus McDuck, has brought him to Dismal Downs to look at their ancestral castle. Because it's time Scrooge learned about, his family. He's 10 years old, he's going to become a man soon, and it's important you know about where you came from. And Fergus talks about how, we still own the land, but, no McDuck has dared come here since the Hound, the monstrous devil dog that chased them out in 1675, and they can't afford to move back. And Fergus talks about how they're members of the clan that try to, pursue our fortunes better, try to, build itself up again. We have Captain Seafoam McDuck, who made a fortune in the shipping trade, but in 1753 he lost it all when Swindle McSue tricked him. And we get this story not just in the Karl Barks comic, The Horseradish Mystery, but also in the Ducktales episode Down and Out in Duckburg. Then we find out about the McDuck treasure, which could help them, but no one knows where it is because Sir Quackley was given a chest of gold for defending King Macbeth in 1057, but he sealed himself away and the treasure, and no one's ever found him or the treasure since then. And Fergus sort of brings up the point, like, we're a poor family, My father was a lowly miner, and the money I make at the factory barely supports the family as it is. The family at this point consists of Scrooge, his father Fergus, Scrooge's sisters Hortense and Matilda. Hortense will be the mother of Donald in the future, his uncle Jake, and his other uncle Angus, or Pothole McDuck. And that's sort of it. And they're barely able to make it as it is. Uncle Pothole has gone to America to try to make something of himself, and that's sort of it. And then they're met by the Whiskervilles. So the Whiskervilles are a clan, presumably let's say as old as the McDucks. And ever since they were chased out of Scotland, or rather out of Dismal Downs, the Whiskervilles have been grazing sheep on their land. And we sort of see the sort of rivalry between the two of them, because the land is still owned by the McDuck, so Fergus and any of them can just go there whenever they want. But the Whiskervilles are very settled, like, you gotta go before the hound gets you. And Fergus and Scrooge are both like sort of up for the fight. And it's interesting to see how Scrooge just wants to mimic his father. It's very sweet. And as it looks like they're about to fight, they hear the hound. And Fergus bolts out of there. He doesn't quite want, but he's afraid. And then we find out that the Whiskervilles were the hound. So way back in 1675, the Whiskervilles dressed up as a hound and scared them all out of Scotland, or Dismal Downs. Sorry, I still can't get over the fact that he was chased out of Scotland, but whatever. And that night, Scrooge he goes to bed very frustrated because he feels helpless. He feels like there's nothing he can do, that he used to be from this great clan, and here they are barely scraping by. And Jake says we don't leave much for young Scrooge to be proud of, and Fergus says our chances have all passed. And he starts working on the shoeshine kit. The kit is being made so Scrooge can hopefully make something of himself, begin to make a fortune, give him something to do, to take pride in, to make something of himself. And then we skip ahead to a few weeks later, and Scrooge hasn't made any success. No one wants to buy anything. No one wants to pay him to clean their shoes. And Fergus says, someone will come along soon enough, I'm sure of it. And we find out that Fergus has planned for someone, Bert the ditch digger, to pay Scrooge for cleaning his boots. And he's arranged it for Bert to pay him with an American coin, so this interaction will make it so Scrooge isn't so trusting, and that it will inspire him to be great. He'll become more shrewd. He'll become more on his toes. And when Scrooge does it, he spends half an hour cleaning. He's barely able to get the request for the payment before he passes out. And when he comes to, he sees he's been paid. It's his first pay from his first honest labor, and he's super excited until he sees it's an American coin. And he says, that guy cheated me. All the hard work. And he says, this should be a lesson. Life is going to be full of tough jobs. There'll always be Sharpies out there to trick me. Well, I'll be tougher than the toughies and sharper than the Sharpies, and I'll make my fortune square. And he has this renewed vigor. And he's so set on going off. And he's, with his new drive and passion, he doesn't see his father thinking the same thing he is. This is the start of something big. And Scrooge redoubles his efforts. He finds ways to clean multiple shoes at once, in a way similar to his 87 cartoon counterpart, Once Upon a Dime. And a few years later, he's able to save up enough for a horse and cart, which he uses to sell firewood, and then he sells peat moss at a higher price. And one day he goes off to Dismal Downs to find peat moss to sell. And he's just sort of there to just look at the cows and says, you know what? I can't help it. And he sort of wonders if he'll ever be rich enough to restore the castle to glory. And he's sort of there you know what? I can clean up the graves at least. And he sees the Whiskervilles there, and they're planning to desecrate the graves to find Sir Quackler's gold, and he wants to get out of there. He knows he can't do anything against them, but the Whiskervilles see him, and he's trying to get away, only to be beckoned in by a figure in the castle, and come in here. And he gets in there, and the Whiskervilles don't go in there because, it's the castle, it's a bit creepy, and he's met by this figure, this duck, who says, you know what, they won't come in here, and you're a McDuck, I can tell by looking at you. Let me give you a tour of the castle. And we see the armor that the McDuck family used to wear. They have full armor, the breastplate and the legs, which they didn't wear because they didn't need them because they're short. And it gave them the advantage, their height with the armor, because of how European armor works. You can't instantly see down. So the McDuck just strike all those blind spots. And then we see a tapestry of Sir Eider McDuck, whose serfs deserted him during a Saxon siege because he only paid 30 copper pieces per hour for the lot of them, which is hilarious. And there's a lot to be said about the McDuck history. This feels almost Game of Thrones. This is like the great houses of Westeros, which makes sense. European history is pretty universal, I think, in terms of how you're doing with fantasy. Family trees are important. And the figure asks, what will you do to help restore the clan to glory? And Scrooge mentions, well, I have this dime, and, it's helping me make my fortune. And he says, well, that's nice and all, but you won't make much of a fortune, shining shoes and selling peat moss. It's like that coin's American, and he sort of guides Scrooge to make a decision to go to America to work with his uncle on his riverboat, which will lead to presumably his fortune. The same way in the '87 version, Scrooge is going to America to meet with his Uncle Catfish, and that sort of sets the story in motion. Now Scrooge has a call to action, another call to action to go west, I guess. Well, and after scaring the Whiskerers away using a combination of McDuck armor, his horse, and peat moss, he then redoubles his efforts to earn enough money to get a slot as a cabin boy on a cattle boat, and he goes off to America armed with only a few sparse details, so a few items, namely his great-grandfather's gold teeth and silver pocket watch. And as he hears his youngest sister Hortense finally say something they can understand, they go off. Scrooge is off into the sunset on his boat, waving his family goodbye. And that's sort of it. And this was a really fun story. I originally read a lot of this out of order, so it was really nice to sit down and go over this again. Scrooge here it's interesting to see how wide-eyed and optimistic he is, especially in Don Rosa's work, and even Karl Barks, where Scrooge is almost sort of an anti-hero in some moments, in terms of how he does. This Scrooge is actually here, you could believe he would become the Scrooge McDuck in Ducktales. It's that believable, this optimism going in, this work smarter, not harder idea. It's all sort of there here, and it is a bit inspiring. It is the immigrant story, from rags to riches. He goes to America to seek his fortune. And what I really do like is not just the atmosphere. The fact this feels like very old, like this could have happened. But we also get the reveal as to who this figure is, and the figure is Sir Quackley McDuck. He is he came down to effectively guide Scrooge to say, okay, well, we've got to get him to go to America. If he makes his fortune there, the clan will be restored to honor because he has to earn his gold. I could tell him where my treasure is, but that won't help restore honor. That just means we got lucky. No, he has to make something of himself. And we see that a lot, that people are invested in Scrooge, and it's his family. His family is helping push him to be something better, whether it's his father, who Scrooge greatly admires, and we'll see how big a role his father plays in his life the further we go down this line. But also in just his ancestors come down and says, look, we're going to guide you a little bit to go here. And that McDuck ethic, that McDuck fire and fury, is now being pushed in a more positive direction towards restoring the clan to honor. And with that in mind, we're going to bring this video to a close here. If you're new to the Bucket Think Tank, feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you are a fan of the Don Rosa book, the Karl Barks books, the Ducktales, and I've missed a connection, feel free to leave that down in the comment section, and I will catch you all later for Master of the Mississippi in this series. This is the Bucket Think Tank signing out. May your fandom serve you well.